Thank you, Alas Ceann Comhairle. As some of the previous speakers were speaking, I recall a press conference given by Martin McGuinness during the course of the recent elections in the North, in which he made the case for the North adopting the corporation tax regime of the South, as has been put forward by Sinn Féin representatives at every North-South meeting that I've attended in recent years, including, I may say to Deputy Adams, private discussions which took place. And when Martin McGuinness was asked about it, the Deputy First Minister, I should give him his proper title, when he was asked about it and people's concern that this would result in a reduction in services and tax available for services, he gave a very specific answer. He said, "I think it will be affordable." He said the reason he supported the move was because it would create potentially 37,000 new jobs through new investment. Now, in a nutshell, he made the case for having a competitive tax regime that is fair and just on the whole of the island of Ireland. And I think we heard just recently an exercise in outrageous cant. In other words, the 37,000 new jobs that might be created, according to Deputy Adams's leader in the North, would be very important for the North. But the 6,000 jobs in Cork connected with Apple, putting us at the cutting edge of world technology that we all depend on now in our daily lives, and that has generated the most tremendous profits globally and specifically for the Apple Corporation. The 6,000 jobs in Cork, the 6,000 families in Cork, the communities in Cork, in Munster, in Dublin, they don't matter. But by God, do 37,000 jobs matter in the North? So what kind of a rigmarole approach is that? And can I also say as well, I think the performance of the government in the period since the Commissioner launched a fairly large exercise in the direction of Ireland and its position in relation to foreign direct investment, I think the government has really been, to be honest, I've been quite shocked at how unfocused, how all over the place. And OK, I know there are competing tendencies in the government, just as there are, of course, on the left, as we know, but really playing out all of the differences all of the time in public so as to send a great message of uncertainty about what this country is about. I think that's a dereliction of duty. And I was sad to see that the Taoiseach and Minister Noonan, two people for whom I have a lot of respect, were really not on top of their game and were not really present in terms of a prompt response on the argument. Ireland is open for business, but we also want tax justice. And in a previous Dáil, when I was opposition spokesperson, I persuaded over a long period of time, it took about 3 years, very detailed discussion with the then Finance Minister Brian Cowan and the subsequent Minister Brian Lenihan to get them to accept the notion of a minimum effective rate of income tax. People who've been in the Dáil here a long time will remember the reports lodged in the library at my request from the Revenue Commissioners, which showed that quite a number of people with incomes, annual incomes in excess of $1 million, were effectively paying a zero rate of tax because of the huge array of tax breaks that existed, and that obviously people on ordinary salaries, large and small, would never have access to. And in fairness, the government at that time did adopt that, and when we came into government, one of the things I persuaded Minister Noonan to do was to review it and to raise it further, so that now, in fact, if you look at the revenue reports, those very, very high earners, no matter what their tax breaks may be, they do pay minimum rates of tax. And that's why I want to recommend the Labour Party amendments, as have been set out by Deputy Howland there, that these amendments have been thought through to be effective and to actually bring tax justice forward in Ireland. I'm not saying they're perfect, because they're cast in a general sense as to how we would deal both with the Finance Act and with the budget to progress tax reform. And tax reform, it's never finished. It's just never finished. You know, you do one piece, and it's very welcome what the Minister had to say about Section 110, and we will look at that closely, because you go to the website of any of the bigger accountancy and law firms in Dublin, and obviously we now have very large business in tax, accountancy and legal services, not just for Ireland, but internationally. And you know, there are very few people in the world, I can say, in my view, who can keep up with how tax practice keeps changing. It changes on a weekly basis, it changes on a national basis, it changes on an international basis. And keeping up with that is almost impossible to do. And that's why in the Labour Party amendments we have a couple of very simple proposals which I believe can be implemented on a continuing basis over a period of years, so that we constantly pursue fair and just taxation, but which also allows us as an island to keep our competitive advantages and to bring the jobs to Ireland and to keep the jobs in Ireland. And, you know, we can decide here today, because we're talking about tax, a lot of people here can decide, oh, jobs don't matter. But of course jobs matter. And we would be very foolish to deny that. So what we want to do firstly is to support the work of the OECD and the EU through the BEPS process, so that we tackle aggressive cross-border tax planning. Now, we can't do that on our own. We can only do that in a multilateral context. And anyone who says differently is basically either not fully familiar with the facts, or they're lying. It's not possible to do it other than a multilateral basis. The second thing, we need to look at all of the loopholes that emerge or that are in the Irish tax structure, so that we move to a system of effective corporation tax rates. We have headline corporation tax rates of 12.5%. We have headline income tax rates. But really what matters in relation to either individuals or businesses with very high incomes or very high taxable profits, it's not the headline rate, because people employ accountants to address that and tax lawyers to address that. The key thing is the effective rate. And therefore our proposal proposes that the effective rate should, over a period of time, on taxable profits, that's the revenues less the allowable costs of the business, that we should move those to 12.5%, so that we come close to 12.5% over a period of time, becoming a real 12.5% in terms of revenues less expenses. If you want to talk about tax justice, and I have to say, some years ago, we had the G20, or which I forget which of the Gs it was, up in the north, in Fermanagh, when, in fact, the then British Prime Minister made developments in tax law and tax justice a key feature of that summit. Now, not a huge amount was achieved out of that, except that people's consciousness, particularly younger people's consciousness, around the need for tax justice really is now an accepted fact. And I think it is appropriate that the Dáil would move to acknowledge that. There was a little bit of tittering here on my left around Oxfam and international aid and what the developing world was missing. Just let me say, as somebody who spent 3 years of my life working on development in developing countries, Ireland alone isn't able to solve all of the problems of developing countries. But our 600 million a year in development aid to countries in different parts of Africa and of the East is extraordinarily important to the lives of many people, and is wrong of a previous speaker here, and of Deputy Adams in particular, to cheapen the contribution that Irish taxpayers, and lots of people in Ireland would identify lots of uses for 600 million, but ours, that 600 million out of our annual income goes to fund education, water, sanitation, basic services in countries where that is a significant amount of money. And sorry, it's not. No, you see, if I can just say, that shows a fundamental misunderstanding that anything to do with development is charity. Development is actually mutual assistance and support, so that we develop economies, develop countries, develop societies, develop people, so they achieve their full potential. Not everybody wants to stay unemployed. People want an active, useful, participative life in which they have a job, in which they have businesses, just as we want for our people in this country. Globalisation and international developments in financial services and tax law, they are moving at an incredible pace over the last decade. The specialisation in all the ramifications in tax law is understood by very few people. So if you compare that then, for instance, in relation to Apple, a company, well, I have to admit, being certainly hooked on my iPad, my phone. I see another deputy there possibly just checking the pocket to see is his iPhone in place. The point is that these are part of our modern world, and inevitably, they are going to generate very significant profits which need to be appropriately taxed, so that the fruit of those inventions is shared by all our societies. And we have to do that on a multilateral basis. Along with the Taoiseach, Minister Noonan, then Minister Howland, myself and other ministers went to the OECD and spent a very long period of time with the people in the OECD, particularly with their tax experts, going through how we actually, this a couple of years ago during the period of the last government, how we actually bring tax justice not just into the Irish system but into the global system. And so, some people here may recall that in 2013, when Pascal Santomas, the OECD expert in this area, went here in this building to the Oireachtas Committee, he said Ireland is not a tax haven. And Ireland is not a tax haven. In fact, if you want to look at tax havens and you want to look at the issue, when we came into government, the double Irish and the Dutch sandwich, we took that off the menu. We had a lot of discussion with Fine Gael before that was amended, but that's the process of politics. Even in your own politics, I think you probably have an amount of discussion. Not everybody automatically agrees on everything. You have to persuade people. You have to persuade people about the consequences. Anyway, the Labour Party in government took the double Irish Dutch sandwich off the menu. And that is a very significant achievement in the global development of a just taxation system. And Ireland, for that reason, has strongly supported the OEC's collaboration with countries right around the globe in relation to developing fairer tax codes. I said, and I must say I was disappointed when Minister Noonan spoke, his reference to an independent investigator or an independent tax expert reviewing corporate taxes, that's rubbish. I mean, that's what the revenue do any day of the week or the month. There's no problem in doing that. Myself or Deputy McGrath or Deputy McGuinness, all of us who have a bit of a basic background in taxation, we could do such a review. I'm sure half a dozen, if not 50% of the Dáil could do such a review. What we need is an actual permanent structure of a standing tax commission which looks at all of the changes on a national and a global basis in relation to tax law, and which sees that we keep abreast, but that also our system provides for tax justice and fairness. And that's why our amendment talks about a standing commission. I think the expert review, which the Revenue will do any day of the week, they're 10 a penny, such expert reviews, and they can be useful in a very limited way. And I've called for many of them on different occasions, but it's not good enough for what's involved here. It really isn't. And I would say it's probably a sop to some of the independents who are in government. And I want to recommend to the members of all of the parties in the Dáil that the Labour amendments do create a basis to work on a rolling programme of developing tax justice in Ireland in a way that will sustain employment in Ireland and in a way that will actually create a very solid and sustainable basis of tax revenues in this country. What we need, I think, in relation to the Apple case, to also look at the broader politics of the European Union in relation to this. And to say that, you know, the Commissioner certainly issued a very clear declaration. I think there also is a serious element of overreach. One of the arguments that I would put forward for there being an appeal, and why the Labour Party will support the appeal, is that if there is an appeal, and if ourselves and other countries are party to that appeal, it means that those other countries that the Commissioner in her comments referenced as possibly having a claim on the 13 billion, and clearly she was encouraging them to go and claim some or all of the 13 billion, that at the appeal stage those countries can also, if they want to, throw their hats into the ring and present their take on it, so that in the long number of years that it's likely to take the appeal process, all of the countries which see themselves as having a strategic interest. In the context of the American elections, can I just say I do hope there's a clear outcome and that obviously I support a particular candidate, but there has been no tax reform in America because basically of the standoff in terms of American politics. And part of the Apple problem is caused by the failure of America to reform its tax laws, both as a federal jurisdiction, but particularly as a state in terms of the American states. Look at Delaware. Delaware is probably one of the most effective tax havens as a state in the entire planet, just as London is probably the next best one, followed by places like Luxembourg and indeed by Holland. No, international tax, it's probably a bit like, you know, lots of international things. It's complicated, and if you want to reform it, you have to work at it in a serious way and bring people along with you so that you get the reform outcomes that you require. Finally, I want to say I saw in this morning's Irish Times an article by I think it's tax lawyer David Beattie, which drew the distinction between the civil law systems of law in Ireland, in the UK and in Malta, and the European codes of law, and the differences, and therefore the problem with that reference in the Commissioner's statement that Ireland had been granted undue tax benefits. And as is said in the Irish Times, that is something which, of course, is very recognisable in European codes of law, but which is much more foreign to our common law code. And again, that's something that's going to have to be worked on. Finally, can I just say, Ireland has a tax regime that is attractive to foreign investors. It's the envy of some of our larger neighbours. Let's not be, guileless about that. As a small island on the periphery of Europe, this is perfectly legitimate in principle. We're not defending every single aspect of our tax system. We want it fair and just, but we have a strong sovereign right to set our tax codes and our tax laws. We were promised that in the Lisbon Treaty, specifically promised it. And the Labour Party will hold out for that. We're not in the business of just being fashionable and saying, oh, you know, just go for this, go for that, without thinking about it and simply disregarding the 250,000 jobs that foreign direct investment into Ireland is responsible for. Because not only do we want to maintain those jobs and see all those people at work and being financially independent, we want to see, and I'll finish on this, we want to see that those companies pay their fair share of tax, but we want the jobs and we want more jobs and more investment.
Thank you, Deputy Burton. I now call on Deputy Paul Murphy, whom I understand is sharing his time with Deputy Richard Boyd Barrett and Mick Barry. Is that correct? That's correct.